you all for joining us this evening for Solon Center for the Arts Let's Talk Art series. We are excited to have Bill Shaffer here this evening to speak to our community about his experiences in the theater industry. Let's go ahead and give Bill a warm welcome.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back at Solon Center for the Arts, one of my hometown favorite places to be. It's a pleasure to speak to you about something that is a once-in-a-lifetime, maybe, experience, and that was a tour of a Broadway show. As you have probably been made aware, Broadway shows are making a comeback, and All Is Broadway is also making a comeback, so it's just kind of a neat time to sort of reminisce, recreate, and maybe give you some helpful advice as to how you might want to get on one of these, if at all possible. So there's what I'm going to look like eventually once I get older. So that's a lovely slide. And welcome to the Let's Talk Art series. If you are at home watching this, the next talk, mark your calendars, June 24th. It is an absolute awesome talk. We don't know what it is yet, but it will be absolutely awesome for you. So that's going to be, mark your calendars now. You're not going to want to miss it because what we all have to say, you'll want to hear, I guarantee it. So Broadway shows, they're a lot of fun and they are very much a lot of work. A lot of people don't realize that it is a ton of work that goes into one of these productions. On Broadway, it's a little easier technically because they don't have to travel. So the thing that is different between a Broadway show in New York and a touring Broadway show is that we have to literally rip everything up, pack it all in, drive it or fly it to the next city, reset, and go again. Whereas in New York, it's set. All you got to do is reset the lights and clean the chairs, and you're good to go. So it makes it a little tougher when you're on the road to get around for things. And sometimes you get affected by weather and other unforeseen circumstances. If a flight gets canceled or you name it, many, many things that happen there. But for tonight, let's talk about how you can get into it, because that's what everybody wants to know. What do you have to do in order to get into a show? The answer is just about everything. You have to be good. You have to train. You have to put in all your hours of practicing, rehearsing, seeing your coaches, getting your dance moves set if you're an actor or actress, being able to sing, being able to speak clearly, which I'm trying to do right now, and also trying to just relate to people as they're sitting in that audience watching you, because if you make no connection with them, it's over. In addition to, of course, doing it virtually flawless, absolutely every night. No pressure. So that's basically what you have to do. So getting the tour, there's a number of different things, and I kind of separated my thoughts into three different ways. If you are an actor or actress, there is certain avenues that you should take. Acting lessons, dancing lessons, all sorts of dances, not just one or two, but a lot of them, because you never know when you're going to need to pull out those tap shoes and use them, like in my show, Something Rotten. If you are behind the scenes, which is just as important, if not more so than people who are out there, crew members, you have to know what you're doing. You have to have lots of experience and be coordinated, and generally know somebody in the business is kind of a nice thing too. And if you don't, then I would advise starting to go to shows once they start up again and start to introduce yourself to the key people who you see in those programs. That definitely is what did it for me. The one I can speak to as firsthand is musician. Most people will tell you it's not what you know, it's who you know. And my answer to that is it's both. Even as just a musician, you have to be the best that you absolutely can be. I put in countless hours in that practice room and honed my skills on the keyboard and spent a long time trying to figure out how to play things correctly and doing it well. And what that turned into was eventually people started to notice that I was actually not just an amateur, but starting to develop into a real live musician. And as that started to happen, even on the Broadway shows, it happened that, again, not necessarily what you know, but who you know. A good friend of mine who still lives in this town introduced me to the Musicians Union. So for actors and actresses, the Actors Equity Union is something to look at and try to be a part of. If you're a stage crew, the IATSE, which I have to look it up because I can never remember, but it's International Alliance of Theater Stage Employees. There'll be a quiz later. And then for musicians, generally what's good enough is joining your own local music union, like I did Local 4 here, or the better one perhaps to get the real gig is Local 802 from New York. And you can always look up, just put in Musicians Union on any search engine of your choice, and it will come up within a heartbeat. So that is how basically to get into what I like to call the big leagues. The other thing is to do it in what I like to call the minor leagues. And that is the community theaters, the not for pay theaters, the ones that you have to volunteer, the ones that you have to put blood, sweat, and tears in and put in a whole ton of work for maybe 12 people that show up and paid $3 each just to cover the cost of the electricity. And you have to perform just as well for them as you do for crowds of thousands later. So there is no on switch. I always tell people this, but there is definitely, you are a performer. Every time you are up on a stage, you are performing, whether there's one person or 1,000 people, it doesn't matter. You have to give it your all. And that's the only way, because consistency behind all of that, no matter if you're on stage crew, actor, actress, or musician, consistency in doing everything exactly the same way every night is what counts. So start honing that skill now. That's one thing they won't tell you out in the real world, but I will, because I know the secrets, sort of. And that is consistency. Do everything the same way and you will make it. Maybe not right away. It's not a fairy tale. It's not somebody waves a magic wand and you get in. You have to put in the blood, sweat, and tears, of course. But the good news is generally somebody will notice. And whether it's somebody in the local theater who has connections you didn't know about, or somebody in the Broadway world who happens to be in the audience, you don't know who they are. We don't generally interview every audience member that walks in. So you don't know who's going to sit in those seats and watch you for the very first time. They do it for sports. They have recruiters. They go out and they look at the people in college and high school and they say, oh, well, that one might be a good player eventually. Same thing happens in theater. Sometimes unaware, people from Broadway or other places will come and observe and say, oh, let me mark that name down because they were good. So that's kind of what to do. And I hate to say that it's always who you know, because it sometimes boils down to that. But the secret behind that is if you don't think you know anybody, start introducing yourself. Be out there. Give out your name, give out your way to contact you, and a way that they can see your stuff. If you have a website, give that to them. The worst they can do is never look at it, and you didn't lose a thing. So how difficult is it? There's a lot of sports out there, and during those sports things, you look at that and you say, all right, well, let's look at baseball. There's how many teams and how many players on each team, so that's pretty good odds. But then we look at Broadway. How many shows are there? Well, there's quite a few, so the odds are getting better of getting into a show, but you have to be the best of the best. You don't just have to be the best in your local area, but you sometimes have to be better than other people in what you do. And not in a braggadocious or a really like, I'm better than you attitude, but just in your work ethic. They have to see that you're willing to put in the hours and the time and the preparation to get everything done. So then they'll want to work with you. Quick story about that, actually. I had the luxury before I went on my own tour with Something Rotten. I was asked to sub in for a lot of other different shows, one of which is probably one you've never heard of. It's called Wicked. And in that show, I was asked to fly up to Wisconsin in February. Lovely idea there. And in so doing, we had a week or 2 weeks, I think, of shows in Appleton, Wisconsin. If you've never been there, you're not missing much. I would say just drive up and down 91 here for about 10 seconds, and that's about it. Nothing to brag about, but they have a lovely theater there which seats about 4,000, and the reason is because nobody there has anything to do, especially in winter, so it's packed. While I was there, we had rehearsals for a particular actress who was about to be put in as Elphaba, the main character in that show. And since she was about to go on for the weekend, and if you didn't know the schedule, getting a little ahead of myself, but 5 shows per weekend is a little rough. She didn't want to rehearse on Friday afternoon because of the 5 shows coming up that weekend. She made it very clear when she first stepped on that stage. She said, I need to save my voice. I'm singing tonight, and I think I have a tickle, and I'd rather not rehearse right now. Big booming director came up over the loudspeaker and said, well, thank you for coming today. And if you wouldn't mind, please pack up your bags, and there's the door. Needless to say, she never made it to that stage because of her attitude. So it is what you know, it is who you know, but more importantly, having that drive and that work ethic will get you as far as you can ever imagine making it, and even a step further. Personal story time, because you're going to hear a lot of them tonight, so just bear with me. And one of them is how I got into Something Rotten, which was the show I was with. The first tour. There was a second tour as well, but the first tour is when they came through Cleveland a few years ago now. I always subbed in here in town for all the different shows, whether it was Billy Elliot or Shrek or Wicked or you name it, Cinderella. I've done a lot. Finding Neverland, Anastasia, Grease. one of my non-favorites, and a few others as well. And for this one, Something Rotten, they came into town, and I had already struck a deal with Finding Neverland, their company, to go sub in for them. So the schedule for rehearsals is we generally have a Tuesday morning rehearsal, and you're supposed to be at that for 4 hours for the music for the show for the one you're playing, and then you go into the show that opening night. So that day that they're in town is usually a long day, about a 12 to 14-hour day for everybody. So my problem was I was supposed to fly out that day in enough time to get down to Texas to play for Finding Neverland there that night. So I started rehearsal here in Cleveland with Something Rotten, the show that I eventually got in, and I had to cut out of rehearsal after about an hour and a half, which is just a no-no, which is usually you're not hired if you have to say that because they'll find somebody else. Well, they didn't. They still used me. And I flew out, and then, of course, being out of town for a week, I couldn't play for the show here in town because I was down in Texas. You can see how this would be all negative so far. Well, getting back, I flew in on a Friday night, and they have you audit, which is just basically observe the show going on and what your part is as far as what I was supposed to play and how it works. And the person who was there, who was the associate conductor at the time, was showing me the ropes and what to do and all this stuff. And so I watched it once, and the next day I was in. I was playing the show after only hearing it once and not even rehearsing all the numbers. So they're just kind of hoping that I knew what I was doing as far as playing goes. They kind of take that for granted. But a lot of my business is using the technology, like using a laptop and using a foot pedal to change the patch sound so that in one part of a song I'm playing a harp, and all of a sudden now I'm playing a tambourine and a tuba. You never know what I'm going to play next. I've also, by the way, got the luxury to play the whirlwind sound in Wicked or the lion roar. Those are two of my favorites. And the cannon shots, by the way, in Finding Neverland. That was also me. Little known tricks of the trade sometimes. So what to do is to be consistent. So that first day I played at intermission, the conductor, whose name is Brian, who I'm going to mention quite a few times here because he and I are still best friends, he walked up to me and he said, that was amazing. Can you play the rest of the run? Well, it was a 3-week run, so I had 2 weeks to go. I cleared my schedule, and sure, yes, I did. By the end of that run, he came up to me again on a Saturday night, the day before they were supposed to leave, and he said, well, our associate conductor is leaving. Do you want to take over and be the associate conductor? I, of course, thinking he was kidding, said, sure, show me the paperwork tomorrow. Lo and behold, that next day, he brought in the paperwork, gave me something to think about. As you well know, I decided, let's say yes, and decided to do that. So that's how I got it. Does that happen to everybody? Of course not. Should it? I would hope so, but it just... So it was because of my work ethic, and they knew the second they heard me that, yes, he can do this, even without rehearsal. So they were greatly impressed. And then I wound up knowing the entire company, and we still keep in touch. So there's the opening. So traveling. The only best shot I have is out of an airplane window. This was flying into, I believe, Denver. We've all most likely been in an airplane and seen that. So traveling is what kind of gets the grueling part of the behind-the-scenes thing going. Traveling is a lot of fun, especially if you get to know people in the cast and crew and you get to become friends, which we all did. Generally, Mondays are our travel day. We pick up and leave the show. We have 2 on Sunday, and then we make sure we're all packed and ready to go. And the airline flights are usually at the break of dawn, so you get to the next city so you can just collapse on that Monday. When you don't have to leave a particular city over a given week, then Monday is what we call a golden day, which means you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You don't have to go to the theater. There's no rehearsal. There's no show. It is your free day. It's your day off. We call them golden because they don't come real often on the road. Usually you're always traveling. Transportation was varied depending on the city. There's certain rules set in place for how you travel. Generally, if it's more than a 5-hour trip by car or bus, you take a plane. And sometimes they made that a little shorter just because they knew. However, what we figured out is that generally, if the cities were 6 hours or less, even though the rules say 5, if they were 6 or less, we generally tried to rent cars and just drive to the next city because then we could be on the ground, we could pack how we wanted, stop when we needed to. And, you know, for me, I think the thrill of the lifetime that whole entire year was getting to stop at Cracker Barrel. Hadn't had that in a year and a half, and I finally found one on the way between Atlanta and Memphis. So anyways, and getting to stay in various hotels of all sorts of different makes and models. I won't get into details there, but some of them were nice. Some of them were almost nice. They were on their way. So that was the traveling side of it. It's, again, pretty grueling, but you get used to it after a little bit. And living out of a suitcase. That's the other part of it that really drove me insane, was because I like to wear a lot of different outfits, as I like to call it. And being on the road, you couldn't take more than 50 pounds in any given airline, so you had to limit that. They give us a trunk, which was pretty large, that we could keep a lot of stuff in, but the problem was those got packed up about 2 days before you had to leave the city. So you got to learn how to plan ahead and figure out what you wanted to wear and switch it out. And unfortunately, even though you're going all the way around the country and all these awesome places that we visit, and we'll get to those in a moment, you can't really buy a lot of things unless you just ship them straight home, because you don't want to carry, like I said, the weight problems all the way around. And once your trunk is full, well, you're sunk. So anyways, traveling was kind of one of the big things that is a little bit different than most things in theater, was getting to that next city. Set up, tear down, holy moly. We sent all of our equipment, the set, the props, the costumes, the soundboards, the keyboards, all the musical instruments, the lighting racks, everything that we needed, the soundboards, you name it, was sent via truck, the large trucks that you see out there. And so we had to make sure that we had enough time from city A to city B to get the trucks there. And setup, I never really took part in. That was on a Tuesday, and we were always rehearsing as an orchestra, so I didn't get to see it. This is one shot I took in particular when I had a moment just to get a kind of semblance of what does it look like when the set is not quite done yet, because it's a very cool thing to see sometimes, and how they're doing it. Obviously, like anything else, kind of like putting together a car, eventually they figure out what they're doing and the order it needs to go, and it's like clockwork. Speaking of clocks, that crew in particular, for us, we were a little short-staffed, so we had to work around the clock to get it to put up in enough time for the next show generally. That was not a fun day. So they generally used Monday, sleep on the plane as much as you could, and once you got to work, you were at work for the next 36 hours, and you had to be alert because the end of that shift was the first show. Good luck. So, set up for us as musicians, this is kind of a shot of one of the pits. I think this is the one, I couldn't even tell you where that was from. It's one of the cities, just pick one. But they all look the same after a while because we always put the musicians in the same exact spot. So as a conductor, we knew when we looked over here, that's where the brass was. When we looked over here, that's where the violin was. And we never had to rememorize anything. For us, it was, we knew where everybody was because we set them up the same way as much as possible in every different place. So this is what the pit looks like just from our perspective. It's not anything to brag about, but that's basically it. And then for us, every Tuesday, whenever we got to a new town, we had a rehearsal in the morning for 4 hours. Nice. With a couple breaks here and there. And we met with the local musicians. And that's one of the things that was really cool. I'm kind of segueing all over the place here, but deal with it. And one of the things we got to do is got to work and meet a lot of people that lived in the cities. And the thing that was really cool is, first of all, they were usually the top-notch people backstage for crew or wardrobe or makeup or hair, or in our case, musicians, because they were the top of the cream of the crop musicians from all these different cities that if they weren't that good, they wouldn't be playing for us or with us. And getting to meet them. And the first thing I would ask is, I'm new to this town. Where would you recommend to eat? Don't give me a chain. I can get that anywhere. But what's local? What do you have here that we don't have anywhere else? And those were usually the places to die for. And you would be looking at that clock at the end of the 4-hour rehearsal going, get me out of here. I want to get to that place. So that was always fun, getting to know the locals. And I stayed in touch with a lot of them over the course of a year. You'd be surprised in traveling to different cities who you come across, who you sort of click with and become instant friends. I'm sure we've all had that happen. And who is sort of a nice person and they're good, but they're kind of a recluse. So okay, well, we met. Great. And others, you turn into really good friends and you wind up like I did, go visiting one of them, like the person in Denver. Fantastic piano player. He could play everything and anything I ever asked. And he's also a nice person. So I went out and actually stayed with him for a week a couple years ago, just because we turned into that good of friends after only just 2 weeks in Denver. You never know. So for us, it was a lot of fun putting all that together. So that's a lot of stuff. And of course, after you do all the rehearsing, and by the way, if you've never figured this out, for every show that comes through, they put down their own floor. And that floor is already pre-marked. So no matter what stage they're on, it always looks the same to them. It doesn't matter what the setup of the theater looks like. It doesn't matter what backstage is, but that is always going to, so if they are supposed to be on spot number 12, that number 12 is always going to be exactly right where they remembered it, and it kind of helps their memory system, and it keeps the show going extremely smooth. But that all has to be set up. Once we do all that, then it's time to perform. Now, this is the fun part, because we generally, unless there was a holiday involved, you did about 8 days a week. I'm sorry, eight days. Good luck with that. 8 shows a week, excuse me. Which, and like I already said, having Monday off, that means we had to double up on a couple days. So the normal schedule was Tuesday through Friday. We did 1 show in the evening, and then Saturday and Sunday we did 2 shows just because double the fun. Why not? So The other thing is, and it's not necessarily stated in any contract that I ever saw, but they generally expect perfection every night, at least as much as you can. Now, everybody is human. You've heard me already, make mistakes. I only make 2 a night. I've had 1, so I get 1 more. But perfection every night means not perfect, but if you do make a small mistake, not giving up or taking your mind out of things so that you then domino and make 3 or 4 more mistakes, that would always be bad. So we always aim for perfection each night. I guarantee you I played for 316 shows. And of those 316 shows, not one of them was exactly the same. There was always something that happened in each show that made it a little different. I got 2 stories for you there. They always say the show must go on. I think I put that up there. Yeah, the show must go on. There was one case in Washington, D.C. where we were at I forget which theater is there. I think it's the National Theater that we were in. And Brian, our conductor for the show, I was the associate conductor, he was the conductor, so that meant basically I got to do like 4 jobs and he only did 1. So I had to learn my part, and I also had to learn how to conduct the show and play his part as well as mine, and be ready at the drop of a hat. So the drop of the hat was, during this particular one night, he got deathly ill. I think it was food poisoning or something that was just not pleasant to think about. So he literally had to run out of the pit, literally. And he called me, and it was a particular spot in our show where there's about 30 seconds between 2 different songs. And he called me over and he's like, "Bill, come here." "What?" "Take over." "Huh? Okay." So literally in less than 10 seconds, I'm jumping up on the podium, sitting down. Now, for our show and a lot of shows now, they use headphones or earbuds to listen to the sound, and we use our own mixer to make sure it sounds right to us. Problem was, he had been using earbuds, and I didn't want to use his for obvious reasons. And my set of headphones was sitting down at my keyboard about 10 feet away from me while we were supposed to start this next number. So the problem in this city is, in D.C., our drummer was remote, so I could not hear him, and I could not see him. Other than that, it was perfect. So I had to go based off of pure instinct and a lot of luck as to how to get into the show. Plus, on there, I couldn't hear a lot of the electronic sounds from the guitars because they're electric guitars. And without headphones, I couldn't really hear them except a little twanging going on from right next to me. I could hear, of course, the brass and the string. That was easy. Couldn't also hear the third keyboardist, who was also just into the headphones. So I was basically going blind and deaf into this now emergency coverage. And no pressure here, but this was the big known in our show where Adam Pascal, if you don't know who that is, look him up, made his first entrance into the show. Not really a huge deal for anybody. So there I was. And of course, I didn't have time to think, what is the speed of this next song, or what is the cue line to get in. I just went on total instinct. And then to boot, I look up at the music stand, and our conductor, who had done it for a year before I ever joined the show, had it memorized. Didn't have music up on the stand. So now I'm going from memory, without a script in front of me, without music in front of me, without headphones, and not hearing the drummer. It went flawless, believe it or not. So there's my horror story. So the show always goes on regardless. The other fun moment is, I forget which city this was in, but one of the cities, they had a light rack, which was a little too close to where the actors had to come in from the proscenium. And walking out to start our show, we had a minstrel, and he would walk out with a lute, and he would strum the lute and sing a song center stage. And that's how we started our show, allegedly every night, except for one night where he got his pants caught on the edge of the light rack walking by. And that was going to be a show that we were not able to publicize, if you can get my drift. We called it a wardrobe malfunction. And so we start the introduction to the first song after getting the call to go ahead and start the show, and he doesn't walk out. And I'm sitting there, and this time I did have my headphones, and they were noise-canceling headphones because I always sat right in front of the trumpet player, and I like my hearing. So I casually was still conducting, taking my headphones off, picking up the phone and saying, "Okay, anybody out there? Anybody backstage? Anybody?" We're still playing, by the way, this whole time. And so they're still playing, and I'm talking, and finally I said, "All right, we'll just swing around, we'll pick them up in a moment." Hung up the phone, grabbed a mic. We had a mic that we can talk to just the orchestra. And I said, "Okay." I said, "We're going to come up to a certain point, and we're going to pause here in 3, 2, 1, pause button, rewind, keyboards go back to the beginning, and we're going to start over. Here we go." And we just started the song over, and he walked out the second time, and we started. And I just told them, if you don't know who Marcel Marceau is, he's a very famous mime from a long time ago. I said, that was the Marcel Marceau show, where that will never be duplicated, where somebody doesn't walk out when they're supposed to. The odds of that happening are generally not good. But again, the show must go on. So performances are a lot of fun. And it's also fun when a seasoned actor or actress forgets their lines. You wonder what you do in community theater, and that is you generally laugh at somebody and you try to make up something. On a professional stage, those ladies and gentlemen up there know each other's lines so well that they can literally ask a question to bring somebody back into character and to get them into their next line, come hell or high water. It's just really cool to see it happen. I've only seen it twice. Once was when our character, and I'll show you all their character, people in character in a few moments, but one character who played the part of Nostradamus was a soothsayer, which means he could tell the future. He had a dream in real life. His name is Blake Hammond. And Blake had a dream in real life where he predicted and he dreamt that he was going to forget his lines. Sure enough, the next day he gets to that moment in the show where it's just him alone on stage, nobody else to save him, and he just froze. And as an orchestra, we're holding one particular note. It's a very dramatic part about one of the songs, and he's supposed to go into this long soliloquy about how he's predicting the future. And so we had another actor just kind of casually walk up and say, so, and he asked the question to prompt him into saying his lines, or at least asking him the question that would give away a line so that the plot of the show wasn't stopped and it wasn't just kind of an awkward moment, although it was. So it happens. We're all human, so we make mistakes. We try not to, but every once in a while, well, we're human. So that is the long and short of performances. And it's just kind of a fun thing to be a part of. I had all these notes written up, and I'm not even using them, so I apologize. But on a typical performance night, if there's a show, we generally have what's called a half-hour call. And some of you know what calls are. It doesn't mean pick up a phone. It means you're required to be somewhere. So in this case, a half-hour call meant we're supposed to be in the building, signed up on the call board before the half-hour call. And they do check. And then they'll say, all right, well, Brian Kennedy, are you in the building? Please report to management. All right, fine. And you generally get in trouble. Not a lot, because what are they going to do? Fire you right then and there, right before a show? Probably not, but they don't look kindly on it. It's just kind of a buffer zone and a safety thing so that we can make sure we're all there. We don't like being last-minute Larrys. So that's one thing. So we have the half-hour call, then they keep telling you 20 minutes, 15, 10, 5, and then they call places. The most interesting places they ever called places at was in Seattle, because in order to get to the orchestra pit, I actually had to go from backstage, down the side, out into the audience, and through a little barricade to get to the orchestra pit. There was no way to get there from backstage. There was no kind of back door. Weird. So I had to walk through the audience, and they kind of knew we were starting when the conductor walks through and sits down. So they had called places, and, well, to be honest, I was in a room which we all have to use a few times a day, and I wasn't quite ready to come out on stage yet. So I wasn't there for places. Well, I had to walk right by the booth where they have management, where they're calling places. And they said, you're late. I said, well, I'm the conductor. Try to start the show without me. A couple of actors thought we were serious. We had this all pre-rigged. We were joking around completely, but they thought, here we are. We're having an argument right as we're supposed to start a show, and we weren't. It was just the kind of relationship I had with the management, which were, by the way, for me, absolutely fantastic, and for all of us. So that's what it means. But generally, in places, we were always there at least 10 minutes early as musicians, because we had keyboards to check. We had the laptops which controlled the sounds, which we had to make sure were up and running and not freezing or giving us the circle of death, which is always a little different from the Lion King circle of life, but it's always more fun. So that is performances. So here are some of the people that are in the show, and I have just a few pictures to show you of them in character. So the main character, I'm just going to back up because every time I turn around, I notice the mic cuts out. That's not a good thing, especially if you're listening at home. So the main character is Nick Bottom. He is kind of the protagonist, if you will. And his wife on stage is B. Didn't ever have a last name. I'm sure it's probably Bottom, but they didn't really call her that. So that's her last name. And the nice thing about those two in particular is in real life, they're also a married couple. Rare in Broadway shows to have that, but they're also a married couple in real life. So there's who they are. Next, we have another couple on stage only. Playing Nigel Bottom is Josh Grizzetti, who is a fantastic actor. He's one of the ones, by the way, that the story I said about forgetting lines. He's one. You can blame him now. Hopefully he's not watching. And next to him is Autumn Hurlburt, who played Portia, named after one of Shakespeare's characters. After that, we have the most famous person in our show, perhaps, besides Rob McClure, who has also made a name for himself really large. And by the way, he's going to start up again in Beetlejuice coming up real soon on Broadway, just for a little heads up there, is, of course, Adam Pascal, who, true story is, if you didn't know this, is actually agoraphobic. That doesn't mean he's afraid of spiders. What that means is he's afraid of crowds, which is kind of ironic, being a huge Broadway star and an excellent singer and musician as well. He was also one of the originals in Rent, both the movie on TV and the Broadway show. So if you've ever seen Rent, that's the guy. So very famous. But he played the part of Shakespeare, because every show should have a Shakespeare. Then here's the guy I talked about before who predicted he would forget his own lines, Blake Hammond as Nostradamus, the guy who almost gets it right when he's predicting the future. And he's not necessarily a main character, but I just love this picture. Lord Clapham, who is, of course, the financer, the producer, if you will, for the show that the Bottom Brothers are trying to produce. So there they have it. There's just 5 people. Life on the road. I put this up next to just kind of talk a little bit. I already talked a lot about travel schedules, but one of the great things we got to do, in addition to being perpetually tired, traveling all over the place, was getting to see some of the best sites around the country that you could ever want to see and getting paid for it. Side bonus there. So lots of things to do. One of the opportunities was getting to catch up with friends and family who moved to all these other cities and just getting to hang out with them for even an afternoon or a morning and just catching up. It was just really nice to do. So one of the places as cast members, then another thing we got to do off stage is we all hung out with each other. We didn't have our families necessarily. We didn't have our friends with us. So we turned into family and friends as a cast. And it really was an easy thing to do. My second night with the show, this was my first week with the show. We were in Las Vegas. Hoover Dam's close enough, so I drove over, rented a car and drove over. I've never seen it, so I thought, let's go see it. But Adam Pascal, of all people, came up to me my second night and said, Bill, you're new here. First of all, and I said, yes, sir. He's like, first of all, don't call me sir. He's like, we're working together. We are co-workers. Okay. And please don't ask for my autograph. Please don't hound me. Please don't be my fan right now. I need you to be a coworker. Sure. Okay. Yeah, it's not like he has a big name or anything, and I was nervous as all get out trying to meet him. But, okay, so I'll try to do that. He said, matter of fact, he's like, after the show tonight, I want to take you out for a drink, and we'll just talk. Texting. I'm going, hey, Michelle, my wife. I said, you'll never guess who I'm sitting with right now. Here. Anyways, so that was my fun moment of getting to know Adam Pascal on a personal basis from day number 2 on the job. Not bad, huh? So that was Hoover Dam. Another place that we went as a cast, and they threw us into prison. I wish I would have gotten that picture. And I apologize for the quality of these pictures. They're not the best. These are all from my phone. And this case was while we were moving on a boat, was Alcatraz, where they threw us into prison and said, good luck. And we said, well, you need to let us out by 6 because we're going to get back to the theater by 7 to get to a half-hour call. Going up into the Space Needle in Seattle, another fun moment we had. Threatened to throw a couple people off, but we didn't. And also in Seattle, we got to ride, of course, the famous Ferris wheel on Pier 57. That was a blast. We all got to do it. And, of course, we're all taking photos of each other up there. None of them look good. Another fun thing we did was while we were in Denver, we drove over on our golden day, one we had there, to the Rocky Mountains, which if you've never been, you have to take time and go see. They are absolutely gorgeous. But one of the things we got to do is we all picked a restaurant, and we had one person who was from Denver, and he knew a restaurant, so we had somebody in our cast and our crew who knew that. He was our assistant props guy, and he said, well, meet everybody at 7 o'clock at this restaurant, and you won't go wrong. And he was right. There were about 28 of us that met that night. There were only 55 of us that traveled, so literally half of us wound up showing up and meeting each other on the one day that we could have avoided each other. We wound up getting together anyways. Costa Mesa was a fun city because it's about an hour just north of LA, and it was a kind of a hoity-toity city, if you will. So a lot of expensive stuff. But one of the things we did is we all went down one evening before the show, because out there, the sun, in that time of year, we were there in December, the sun set at 5 p.m. So that was long before our show started. So we all got there and were able to admire the sunset off of the ocean there. And while we were there, of course, we had fun at the Santa Monica Pier. And if you've ever seen the movie Big, then you'll recognize most of that. One of the other things we got to do while in Utah this time was going to see the now defunct or renamed Mormon Tabernacle Choir. It was truly an amazing experience, and I wish I would have gotten a better photo of this because the person who is the concert master of this orchestra was also the person who played violin for the show, so that was our connection to that. This, if you've never been into the tunnels of Washington, D.C., I told you the horror story of jumping in on a dime to take over a show, but one of the fun moments was going down what I think is the world's longest escalator. It is literally, you can't see the bottom from the top. It's that long. If you've never been on the trains down in D.C., you need to go just experience that. And we got to do it every night. So I decided, let's take a picture. Why not? And of course, when you go to Orlando, you have to visit the Mouse. It is a requirement by law. And so we did. And our company was generous enough to give us literally a week pass because we were there for only 1 week. We wish it was longer. But every day we could go to Disney World, and we always set timers to leave at 4 so that we were never late. But we got to go to Disney World as much as we wanted for the entire week while we were there. So, of course, we all did. And we were exhausted that following week. I'm surprised we had any shows. So that is kind of what we did. And the other thing, like I said, is we became each other's family. This is a group shot. While we were in Seattle, a person in our cast, his name is Kyle. His parents live in Seattle, and his parents invited us for a cookout, something what we like to call normal on the road. We don't go to people's houses because we don't live in houses. We only live in hotels or Airbnbs. So going out into the suburbs to a house, the neighbors were just kind of mesmerized because they're like, wait, an entire Broadway cast is right next door. But for us, it was a lot of fun. We were just able to lounge, chill, we played bocce ball. We did all sorts of stuff all sorts of games and stuff, and just kind of took it easy. We had a cookout, we had a sing-along, we did anything we could think of just to pass the time. We were there for like 8 hours, and it was great. It was a great way to spend a Monday. The other thing is, as when you're on the road, they generally don't give you holidays off, except we actually got Thanksgiving Day off. But being out in LA, it's a little bit far from Cleveland, so it was very hard to fly home for 1 day to fly back. So instead, they said, well, why don't we sponsor just having a Thanksgiving meal for everybody, because it's very hard to get away for just 1 day. And our company provided an entire meal, turkey and everything, for all of us on the rooftop of a hotel that they rented, not even the one we were staying at, but a different one. And so there's a cast photo, just about all of us, including crew and cast, that went to this lovely, and I dare say a great time, Thanksgiving meal. By the way, in LA, if you've never been out there, the weather's always perfect, unless it's not. And then one of the other things, speaking of LA, that was one of my personal favorites was going to a Price is Right taping. If you've never been to that show live, you're missing out. It is perhaps one of the wildest times we ever had as a cast. And we all wore these shirts, and it's very hard to see on this picture, but one of the lines in our show was, "To thine own self be true," which was a takeoff of Shakespeare. But instead, because of who hosted it, we changed it just a bit to go, "To thine own self be Drew," as in Drew Carey. And he, of course, loved that. So, hey, what are you supposed to do? Make a great pun, use it. So we all ironed on all these things and went to the show. And one of our cast members made it to the final, but he overbid. So, nonetheless, we were at least on there and got some recognition. So the other thing, in addition to all that, is here's a photo of us on our last day, which was technically a very sad day. It's hard to do a comedy on your last day because we're all very depressed and going, oh, we're all parting ways. But we still had a great time, even in the last show. So the other thing we got to do along the way is we got to meet several celebrities. And I'll just give you a moment to see if you can figure out who this is before I tell you. I can just give you one small clue. If you've ever seen the Avengers movies, he's not an actor. But he is perhaps one of the most important people behind all of those movies still. And he is the producer for all of the Avengers movies. It's Joss Whedon. So he was at one of our LA parties, and I said, well, let's get a selfie. So a lot of these you'll see me with somebody else you might recognize. The next person, if you go back to the 90s, would have seen a comedy show called Saved by the Bell. This is the person who played the famous Mr. Belding, and his real name is Ryan Haskins, and he's Dennis Haskins. Ryan Haskins is a friend of mine. My bad. Dennis Haskins. I knew I should have looked. But just one of the nicest people that you would ever want to meet. And I asked him. I said, I just got to know, why did you not do any other shows after that? You were so awesome. He said, that's my only character. That's who I want to be remembered by. I didn't want to do anything else. Okay, must be nice. I'm sorry it's so blurry. This is a really, really good close-up selfie during a show, actually, in the intermission, of one of the most famous people ever in Broadway and around the world. Her name is Liza Minnelli, and I had the pleasure of conducting in front of her, and she's literally sitting in the front row right behind me. No pressure there. And in our show, we had a camera off on this side that would angle in so the people who were farther away in the orchestra pit and backstage could see me. And because of where I was sitting, where the camera was, it was blocking her in our in-house camera. And so the phone rings after the first number. They're like, Bill, scoot back. We can't see Liza. Okay. They wanted to get her facial reactions because she was notorious in those days for, if she didn't like the show, she would either get up and leave during or for certain at intermission. She stayed for our show, so that was a good sign. And here is all the characters out of character. This is Adam Pascal, who I am still good friends with, and our two other leads, Josh Grizzetti on the right and Rob McClure on the left. And here is the guy who played Nostradamus. Isn't it amazing? They don't look anything like their character. Blake Hammond, who is a really good friend. I also got to work with him on Cinderella. That's another thing, too. And Scott Cody is an interesting guy. He played, and I forgot to put his other picture up there, where he was Brother Jeremiah. So he dressed as a Puritan. And his most interesting previous life was he was an announcer for Saturday Night Live. So that made it interesting, especially backstage sometimes when they wanted to make announcements. We'd hear a guy and we're like, what? Oh, I thought we were on Saturday Night Live there for a minute. Yeah, and the person who played Portia, that's Autumn. And here is, unfortunately, a little bit of a blurry shot of Maggie. So that is who we are. So being on tour was a great experience. They always say that the best part of vacation is twofold: leaving, and then the second part that is really awesome is coming back. So for me, getting out on the road was an awesome experience. I will never, ever want to trade that in for anything on this planet because it was so cool to put it in layman's terms. Getting to meet so many people, getting to work with them, getting to be the person who literally sometimes saved the day for a show was fun, and being an integral part of a production that, yes, we earned money for, that's great, but we also do it because we have a passion for it. If we didn't have a passion for it or a drive to do it, it would have never happened. Even if we were the best people in the world, it would have flopped. And our show not only was funny for us, after 316 shows, you'd think the same joke every night wouldn't be funny, but it sure was. And they would find different ways, sort of, for us at least to do it. And that audience only got to see it once. We got to see it every time. And they would switch up just a little bit of how they would say a certain line or a word here and there just for us, just to make it fun. And it would keep our interest. And we had a blast doing it. So closing it up, we ended up in Providence, Rhode Island, which who shouldn't? And we all really keep in touch. Last year during the pandemic, we had a Zoom meeting. Of the 55 cast members, 52 of us signed on board for this Zoom meeting, and it was very confusing to try to find people in there, let me tell you. But 2 days ago, 3 years ago, and 1 day from this very day, our show closed. So it was almost 3 years to the day from tonight. It's one night off. We closed on the 19th. But it was an experience of a lifetime. If asked to do it again, I'd have to think about it because I now have really established here in town, and I don't know if I'd want to pull up roots again, but it's really tempting. But if you ever get that opportunity to jump up on that stage and do your thing, do it. Take the risk, take the plunge, make the commitment, commit to it, do it, have fun, enjoy it, and treasure every moment because you never know when it's just going to end. So that's about it for all of that. If you have any questions, Allison, do we have any questions come in? I'd love to hear what you have to say, because now we'll do a little Q&A if you have any.
Great. So, Bill, we do have a couple questions for you.
Sure, fire away.
Our first one is, did you have to audition or interview as a conductor?
No, I'm sorry. I should have gotten into that. So who asked that? I'm just curious. Does it say?
No.
No. Anonymous. Okay, so for the anonymous person out there, for interviewing or auditioning, my audition was, I kind of went into the story, it was actually just playing the show for the first time. That was basically my audition. They don't, at least for musicians, they don't necessarily audition people. They observe how you are as, in this case, a keyboard sub. Sounds lovely, which is what I was. And I played the show, and it went so well. And the funny part was, they said, oh, we'd love you to be conductor. And I said, okay, but I've never conducted a Broadway show. Deal breaker? They said, no, that's actually better. What? No, they said it's better because then I won't have any preconceived ideas or be set in my ways, and they can completely train me how they need me to. Okay, well, if you're willing, I'm willing. So my first city was Las Vegas. We were only there for a week. When we're in towns for a week or only a week or sometimes even two, we generally don't have a keyboard sub, which is what I did here. So that means I couldn't have conducted even if I wanted to. Well, then the next stop, we were for 4 weeks in San Francisco. Well, they definitely had a keyboard sub. And because of the contracts and everything there, which I won't get into, but their keyboard sub was required to play that first week, which was now my second week with the show. Well, they said, well, you're going to be up in weekend number 2 of the show. I said, well, that's fantastic. There's only 2 problems. Number 1, I've never seen the show. If we're in a pit, the stage is here, and all the actors are way up there, and I can't see them. Never, unless they're at the front. I couldn't see anything. And a lot of the places and the things I was told when to start a piece was a sight cue. So if I don't see it, how can I start it? So I literally had to audit my own show, where they brought in the keyboard sub, and I sat next to Brian, the conductor, and watched the show for the first time. Only saw it once, and then had to conduct it the next night. That was kind of fun. Nervous as all get out, but it worked. So auditioning was non-existent for me. Not necessarily the norm, but that's just the way, in my particular story, that's the way the ball bounced. So what's the next question?
So being on tour, you were able to see a lot of cool and different places. What was the one thing that you missed about being home or around your family the most?
I had an awkward moment when we were in Dallas. Our tour setup was so concise that we decided that it was probably a good idea to go from Dallas, Texas to Hershey, Pennsylvania in 2 days. Well, if you're on a plane, that's easy, but getting all the equipment there, not so easy. So the trucks took an extra day to get from Dallas up to Hershey. Plus, it was still wintertime, so you can just imagine all the funicity of once you get up north a little bit, then you have all the weather to deal with. So since we weren't going to open in Hershey until Wednesday instead of Tuesday, I found a flight out of Dallas and got back home. I left at 6 in the morning on Monday morning after we got done with all our shows in Dallas. Flew in. I was home in Cleveland here by noon. And for me, just being home was, first of all, weird. Unfortunately, I have 4 cats. 2 of them ran from me because I was gone for so long. That felt kind of odd. They warmed up to me after an hour or so, but it was a little startling. But for me, just being able to be myself and not have all the pressure of being on a Broadway show, just for even a day and a half, just is what I needed, just to relax and get back to things. So for me, not being home was one of the roughest things. Thanks to you can have the video chats, you can have the Zoom, which we had then. I could see things and interact. And my cats still to this day know to answer a phone. They figured it out because they knew when that little box turned on, that was me on the other end, and I would talk to my cats, and most of them would talk back. So that for me was a thrill. So one of the things you never think they learn.
The next question we have is a 2-part question.
Oh boy.
The first part is, what was your favorite city to see or to travel to? And then the second part is, what was your favorite city that you performed at?
All right, the favorite city that I visited to actually just be a tourist in was definitely San Francisco. Between Alcatraz and the Wharf and everything else that they have to offer there was just phenomenal. However, the theater there, it wasn't the best. And it was in a rocky part of town, so that part was never fun. Getting attacked in broad daylight with somebody with a machete, well, you don't need coffee after that. But the most fun city that I performed in, I believe, was probably Denver, of all places, because the pit, that was the picture I now remember of the one I showed you a while back up there. And that we could have put a lounge chair next to our keyboards because it had that much room in the pit, which is unusual. So it was so spacious. You literally had to shout to the other side to get their attention because you were so far away. It was very lovely. So Denver was my favorite performing city. San Francisco was perhaps my favorite to be in.
What is one of your favorite shows that you worked on or being a part of in Cleveland?
In Cleveland, I got the opportunity once to play for Pippin. If you've never seen that show, it is a great show as well. And in that, if you aren't familiar with it at all, it is basically a circus act all around you while they're doing a show. And they all have to learn how to juggle and to throw things that are not necessarily safe to each other safely and not injure anybody, either themselves or us. For one particular show, they had netting above the pit, so in case something happened, because they were on unicycles and juggling and throwing things, in case something went askew, we had a little bit of protection there. So in one particular scene, the person who plays the king was supposed to throw a sword to his son, and of course that person was supposed to catch it. Well, guess what? It's live, and you never know what's going to happen, and they missed. Well, here comes this, and it's during a song, of course, so this flying sword is coming at me, and the conductor, who is Ryan, who is still a friend of mine too, All of a sudden I hear in this microphone saying, "Bill, duck, now." I look up and there's that sword. Well, I literally took the chair and just fell over onto the floor because I had nowhere else to go. There was no place to go behind me. I couldn't just slide down. I had to just fall over. So I literally just fell off my chair and this sword came flying at me. Now, the hilt got caught in the netting, which was the awesome part. Problem was, based on where I was sitting, it was closest to the audience and not at all close to the stage. Well, if you've ever been in one of those shows, there is the stage and then there is the deck. Well, as an actor, you're not supposed to go onto the deck because that's danger. If you stay on the stage, you're fine. But that deck area is danger zone, and if you have a little bit of vertigo or whatever, you could fall and injure yourself or somebody below. So they were a little bit stuck because they still needed that prop for the next scene. So there it is, swinging above my chair. Now I'm calmed down, checking my pulse. I'm not dead. Okay, here we go. And so as a person who was supposed to play, I sat out the rest of that number, justifiably so. But I got back on my chair, and then I see the sword hanging and swinging right above me. And so the person who, by the way, is John Rubinstein, if you don't know who that is, he was the original Pippin way back in the 70s, then came back as the grandfather in the tour, looks right at me, and he says, "Excuse me, sir, can you hand that back to us, please?" And he was dead serious. Definitely not in the script. So I stood up on my chair, jimmied it out, and handed it as good as I can up to the person who was playing the son. He's like, "Wait a minute, take a bow." So I had to turn to the audience as a person and just the musician and take a bow. And of course, I got an ovation. Why not? So that was perhaps one of the most memorable moments ever of a show, was being part of the show without a plan. So that was a fun moment.
Great. And Bill, for our last question of the evening,
Sure.
What is your favorite or most fulfilling part about your passion that became a career?
Wow. Okay, so to sum it up in a nutshell, I love to play for others. Playing piano, playing organ, playing any instrument. If you truly have a passion for something, it doesn't matter if you're the best at it or the worst at it. If you have a passion and want to do it, by all means, do it. Get up, get over your nerves, get over yourself, get over any criticism that might come your way, and get up there and do it. The worst that can happen is someone tells you they don't like it. I'm still standing. I've had several people tell me. I had a piano teacher, I won't name names because they're still around. I had a piano teacher, not here at Solon, that told me, "You have no future in this business, you should quit." Luckily, I'm stubborn. I didn't listen to that. So if anybody ever tells you you're no good, you're never going to make it, you shouldn't make it, you shouldn't be doing this, ignore them completely but nicely, and say, "I'm going to do it anyways." And if nothing else, that should give you further incentive to actually prove them wrong, which eventually later the same person came up and told me I was wrong and apologized. But that could have set me back for life. And this was in high school, so many, many moons ago. And my biggest thing is, if you have a passion for something, go for it. Everything around it will take care of it. I've always said this, and I will continue to say this until I die, and that is, I have never, ever worked a day in my life. Do I earn a living at a job? Yes. But I get to do what I love 24/7. And if you can find that and make it work for you, you'll be good. There we have it.
Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us today.
Thanks.
And thank you to our community to learn a little bit more about our theater and what Bill does. We look forward to continuing our series on Thursday, June 24th.